Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This is session 1 of Advocacy in Focus, a series from the Preservation Leadership Forum and Main Street America Institute. In this first session of the program, we're going to talk about working with advocacy coalitions. And before we get started with today's program, I want to tell you a little bit about the platform and make sure you understand the dynamics of the course. So if you are currently dialed into the telephone conference, this is a toll-free number, but you also have the option to use the connection on your computer if you prefer. So to do that, you can hang up and click mic and speakers under the audio panel on the right side of your screen. We look forward to answering your questions. During today's program, there will be Q&A time reserved at the end. You may type your question into the question or chat box on your control panel at any time. And we will make sure to address everything that we can during the program or follow up where we cannot. The recording of this session will become available about 2 days from now. So if you want to re-watch the session at a later date, you're able to do that. The recorded presentations and the materials for this entire 5-session course are available at your InReach account. That's mainstreet.inreachce.com. You created an account there when you registered for the course. There you can find under each week of the course the presentation recording, the materials for the session, including slides of the program and a handout that accompanies the program from our advocacy toolkit. And you may also there take a quiz after each program to certify your knowledge. And if you choose to follow through with taking all 5 quizzes, you would earn credit towards the Main Street America Institute's Leadership Development Certificate. I'll provide more information for any attendees that are interested in learning more about the Main Street America Institute's Leadership Development Certificate, but this course would give you credit, one of 2 required courses in a workshop for that program. So we encourage you to complete as you will so that you have the ability to later earn that certificate if you so choose. In your handout section on your control panel, you'll also find those slides for today's program, so you can check there if you would like to follow along, take any notes. And we highly encourage you to reach out to us. Main Street America Institute is available at msai@savingplaces.org for any questions throughout the program. There is not an immediate evaluation after this session, but there'll be a comprehensive evaluation available after all 5 of the programs. Keep in mind as well that we're offering this free to everyone because we want to create the most robust network of preservation and Main Street advocates. So we'll also be posting recordings of these sessions on our website so that you may also view them and share them externally. So with that, I want to introduce our moderator and main presenter for today's program, Renee Kuhlman of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Renee, welcome.
Well, thank you. So thank you, Kelly, for that introduction, and thank everyone for being here this afternoon. We are very pleased to be talking about advocacy, which is something that is near and dear to all the presenters' hearts today. And a little bit about the origin of this series. We had created an advocacy toolkit about a few years ago, and we're in the process of updating that. So you will be getting with each webinar an updated chapter. So that will be very helpful for you. So let me show you, start off with exactly what is a coalition. And I put 2 examples up here. The first is a definition that I handily looked up on the web, which is a temporary alliance of people coming together for a specific purpose. And the reason why I have this picture on the right is because I think it has a great example of that alliance coming together. So you can see myself there on the left and a bunch of folks who went up to Capitol Hill to talk about the issue of deferred maintenance in our national parks. And we have a congressman there in the middle next to Mr. Johnstone, who is holding the Great American Main Street Award. And when I asked him if he would mind bringing this to the Capitol to walk around for about 7 hours, visiting all the offices in Pennsylvania, I didn't realize it was solid bronze. So Malcolm did a great job that day, not only talking about the Main Street program, but also carrying around that award all day. But it made a big impression with the legislators that we met with. And as a matter of fact, the coalition that was built around this deferred maintenance issue in our national parks has really come to fruition. So it was a small representation there of a Main Street program. You have the Gettysburg Foundation represented there on the right. You have a local preservation group, the Preservation Alliance of Greater Philadelphia, and a landscape concern. All together, they're working together on one issue. And just last week, the Senate voted to pass the Great American Outdoors Act, which would mean billions of dollars for addressing deferred maintenance in national parks. So it's a big victory, and we're hoping that we will be able to get that to the finish line during this Congress. So let me just advance the slide here. So I think we know about the benefits of a coalition. They're pretty self-explanatory, but many hands make light work. So pooling all of your resources together, financial, the brain power, all of that human resources really does benefit, and that's why we form coalitions. And then it also demonstrates a broad range of support, not only to your elected officials, but it also demonstrates a broad support to other folks, constituents, voters, and it also demonstrates a broad support for media. So there will be another session just specifically on media because that's such a key component of an advocacy campaign. Because you would have many different coalition partners, you're able to reach a larger audience, which is part of the mission of advocacy is additive. So the more people that are saying the same outcome is what they want is something that a lot of coalitions are formed for. Not only can you make new contacts by forming a coalition, but you can also learn techniques. And I have learned a great deal through the collaboration with Main Street on working for a funding effort to get funding from Congress for Main Street programs. So you continue to learn new techniques and new things from each other. And then finally, when you're in a coalition, you're raising awareness of each other's priorities for sure, but you're also raising, all the other concerns that you come with when you enter into a partnership and enter into a coalition. So they're great learning opportunities, and that's some of the reasons why people form these coalitions. So this is my top tips for starting a coalition. And this is based on 23 years of being in dozens of coalitions, whether at the local level, state level, or national level. And the first part is to identify and then evaluate who would be a good partner for this particular effort. The thing that you want to be aware of is these partnerships are not for life. You can be partnering with an organization that you may have been in opposition with before, but on this particular issue, you agree on the specific outcome that you want to achieve. And so, for example, we've been working with different coalitions on state historic tax credits. And so those particularly benefit a wide range of folks, whether it's architects, bankers, developers, small business owners. So we just try to think through all the different potential partners. And then we figure out who is the best person to approach them and make the case that this is a good thing to become a partner. We typically write out who does what because it's always good to have written down somewhere. It doesn't have to be formal, it can be in an email about who's going to do which specific piece, so that eliminates the confusion. I will say that being more formal, if you are jointly hiring a lobbyist, is something that you would want to consider. But having a written document is very, very helpful. Something that I stress a lot in all the coalitions are holding regular meetings. And I know that seems like a really small, very small, insignificant thing, but this one to me is crucial Because if you're not having regular meetings and people are not producing what they're promising, that's a problem. So I'm a big believer in holding regular meetings. Another tip is to create a distinctive coalition name. And I say distinctive because you want the effort to stand out, but you really need to think through what that might mean. I was involved in a coalition that threw in a word that they thought would make it sound good, but they didn't really have the buy-in of the main group for which that would have been benefit for. So thinking through the name of the coalition is really important. Another important tip is to create team approved materials. So you're bringing together a bunch of different people with all widely different experiences and perspectives, but you've got this one main goal you're trying to achieve. So having just a very brief document with talking points that everyone agrees to, whether or not you're coming at it from a landscape architect point of view or an economic development point of view or a Main Street point of view, having joint common talking points is important. And then the last tip that I have is to share information about the coalition widely. A lot of coalitions that I've been involved with have listed out all the coalition partners, whether it's on a brochure or a handout or materials that they leave behind, because at the end of the day, having all of those different groups saying the same thing, that is lending credibility to the effort. And finding ways to highlight coalition partners is a really important part of the effort. The group then comes together to offer different types of activities to educate officials. And again, this is an example of the effort for deferred maintenance. I like this one because it shows a representative from Preservation, Iowa, with Senator Ernst, a county economic development representative, and then a Main Street director. So all those voices coming together really made an impact with Senator Ernst. But these are the types of activities that a coalition will generally take. And that is meeting with decision makers, whether you're meeting with them back home, when they're back home in your community, whether you're making an appointment and you're going to see them in their office, whether you are all coming together to have a lobby day event or a day at the Capitol, an awareness reception. But these are the types of activities that a coalition will generally work on. Those talking points that I talked about, those then become the genesis for coordinating an email and phone campaign. So you're getting the information out. And then a lot of times people are joining together to write a letter. Never underestimate the power of a good sign-on letter. I think one of the best examples I have seen came from Wisconsin. It had over 500 different organizations and individuals, and it represented every type of perspective on the federal historic tax credit. To this day, it remains one of the best letters I think I've ever seen, and it was because they were all saying one request of their members in the Wisconsin congressional delegation, but they were showing that they had such a broad support for this particular request. And then my last tip before we hear from some amazing advocates is that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a site visit is worth 10,000. You need to get your elected officials and administrative officials out to see what you're trying to preserve. We are place-based people, whether it's historic sites or whether it's your downtown Main Street, a building you're trying to save. So I would strongly organize getting them out to see the site and see the work that you're doing and see what you're trying to achieve. Sorry, I have to keep doing this. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Janie Harriet. She is from Hartsville, South Carolina originally. She has been an educator. She has educated in the public schools. She's been at the college level in New Jersey, and she returned home to Hartsville. She decided to take on different community organization roles. And after she retired, she then didn't slow her down. She became the executive director of the South Carolina African American Heritage Foundation, as well as the chair of the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission. So thank you for being here, Janie. I know you have a lot of tips to share, and we're excited to hear them.
Thank you. I glad to be here as well. Oh, there we go. I just love sharing our story and hope that it can help somebody. You wanted me to talk a little bit about how we got started. Back in 1992, like I said, I returned from New Jersey in 1990. And in 1992, I was working on saving my high school from becoming a Walmart. And so we created a nonprofit. And the great thing about that was we built a coalition. We pulled together alumni of the high school, community members, community organizations, the corporations and businesses. We were just lucky enough that we had a Fortune 500 company in Hartsville, Sunoco Products Company, not Sunoco, Sunoco. And they were a big contributor to not just funding, excuse me, but to advocacy as well. And our goal was to convince the school board to donate the property, the entire school property, to the Butler Heritage Foundation, which we created, and I was the original chair, for a community center. And so it took us about a year. We met with every elected official in Darlington County, South Carolina. Personally, I met with every elected official. With a cadre of other people, we developed we called it our dog and pony show back then, because of course, back in 1993, we didn't have the technology that we have now. And because of that work, I was asked to attend a meeting by the Department of Archives and History, Historic Preservation Office, to talk about what was not being done for African American preservation in South Carolina. And again, we rallied people who could support us. We talked to community leaders. We talked to professors. We talked to historians. And we pulled together a group of people to lobby the General Assembly to create an African American Heritage Commission. And at that time, they called us a council. But the House of Representatives introduced legislation to create the African American Heritage Council, and Governor Carroll Campbell appointed 15 of us to the council to work with the Department of Archives and History for the preservation of African American history and culture. After that, it was created by a joint resolution. And when the resolution died, it just so happened that I got an opportunity to lobby the governor because he was visiting a project that I was the executive director of. And he issued an executive order creating the African American Heritage Commission. And so now for more than 27 years, the commission has been working to preserve African American history and culture in the state of South Carolina. In 2005, when I retired, we created the African American Heritage Foundation because When the commission was founded, it was founded with no funding. And so, again, I lobbied the General Assembly with the help of some other members to create funding. And the General Assembly at that time, I think in 2006, appropriated $25,000 for the commission, which is all we still get. But what we've done is we have created a coalition of more than 500 people across the state who are members of the foundation that we use to help us advocate for historical markers. When we were created in 1992, 93, there were only 36 sites in the state that were either listed on the National Register of Historic Places or had a South Carolina historical marker. Today, there are more than 400. And I give credit to those people across the state who became a coalition to work on placing historical markers. I just had a meeting this morning because we just got a grant to do 20 additional historical markers in the state. So by the end of the year, we'll be up to over 450. So it's about working with people. It's about creating relationships. I have relationships with in my local community. It just so happened that the Speaker of the House of the Representative for South Carolina is my representative, and we know each other on a first name basis. On the state level, I know most of the people in the House and the Senate and can call them up and say, we need help with this. How can you help us with this? So it's about building those relationships so that people don't always feel that you're just calling on them when you need something. Another member of the House of Representatives that lives in my community frequently calls me because he knows that if there's something that he needs done, that he can get members of the commission to assist. And so we know that when we need something done in the House, we can call him as well. The other thing that we've done is we've built coalitions with other historic preservation organizations. The Gullah Geechee Heritage Commission, the Mitchellville Preservation Project, the new IAAM Museum, local museums around the state. We work with all of them. My sister said to me one day, sometimes I think you meet yourself coming from a meeting, back to Renee's discussion about meetings, but you have to interact with people so that they can know your passion about what you're doing, and it's catching. I don't know how much else you want me to say, Renee, but what I know is in building coalition, you have to be present yourself. You have, and it can't always be, I need. It has to be, we can help each other, make this a win-win situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, Janie, that one of the things that you brought up is that relationship building and how important that is. And I'm wondering if, I mean, you came up to Capitol Hill and walked around, and you knew a lot of those folks already.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Well, for the South Carolina delegation, over the years, I've made it a point to ensure that they knew who we were, being the commission. And because I've served in a leadership role in the commission for at least 15 years, many times it was knowing who I was. So when I came up to Capitol Hill, Congressman Clyburn didn't have to wonder who was there. He knew exactly who I was. Tim Scott and some of the others, they knew who we were. So it wasn't a matter of introducing. And but it's not just about me working with them specifically. I know their staff. I can call anyone on Congressman Clyburn's staff at any point and say, hey, this is something that we're working on. Can you ask the congressman if he can help us? Or what advice would you have for us? And so not only do I know our elected officials, but I make it a point to know their staff as well. Of course, in the state, in the South Carolina General Assembly, it doesn't hurt that my sister-in-law works in the House of Representatives. So I can always call her up and say, I need to see a bill, or do you know who's introducing this bill? Or can you send this person a message for me? And what happens is I build relationships with everybody in the House of Representatives clerk's office knows who I am. People on the staff of most of the senators know who I am, because you can't always get to the principal, but the staff, if the staff knows you and you get them to support what you're doing, then they will assist you with that effort.
Well, I don't think anyone could have said that as eloquently, because I know a lot of us are trying to figure out how we can be impactful. And I think that impressive number from 36 to 400 just says it all. So thank you very much for sharing your insights. Let's ask Mary if she will share her experience. And let me introduce you, Mary. Mary Helmer is the president and state coordinator of Main Street, Alabama. And before she came to Alabama, she was a local Main Street director in Emporia. And it was during that time that the first Kansas Main Street to win the Great American Main Street Award happened under her leadership. So that was exciting. Then she served as state coordinator for Kansas and served as a private consultant for a while before coming to Main Street, Alabama. So thank you for joining us today, Mary, and sharing your insights.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm pleased to, let me move that. That works a lot better when that's not on there. I'm pleased to be here with you guys today. Advocacy is such an important part of what we do all the time. And following along in Janie's vein, just talking a little bit about the constant line of communication that you have to have out there. And the lovely thing about Main Street in general is we always have a good story to tell. So you have to tell that number within that story within numbers, because we are economic development. At the heart of what we do, we're economic development. And right now, with everything that's going on with COVID and everything else, the economic development piece is becoming more and more a piece that will be funded. So it's important that you keep your numbers up to date, but it's also important that you tell that story that still tugs at the heartstrings. Why is it important to you? Why is the history where it needs to be, and how we move forward from here? So for Main Street, Alabama, if you look at our website, you can tell we have 28 designated cities, 25, 26 networked cities. So we've got quite a little bit of the community involvement across the state of Alabama. And if you look at our numbers, we are since 2014 at 988 net new or relocating businesses, because we also track businesses lost and jobs lost. That is part of what the National Main Street Center requires. It's a fantastic tool for you to use. And going back to Janie, when she talked about the dog and pony show, I smiled when she said that, because we called it the exact same thing. Time to do the dog and pony show. And it's important that you have numbers, but it's also important you're able to tug at the heartstrings when you have those. So 5,700 new jobs, 50 million public, 422 million private, and then 107,000 volunteer hours. Go ahead. Go ahead, Renee. There we go. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Main Street, Alabama story. It was located within state government. It was one of probably the first handful of states that came on back in the 80s as part of the founding of the National Main Street Movement. Located in state government for 20 plus years. was located within the Alabama Historical Commission. I was blissfully unaware of all this in Kansas while this was going on, but they continued to get kind of winnowed away at. Funding was cut, staffing was cut. They finally got down to one staff person and they shut down the program. That happened like 2008. So they went 10 or more years without any sort of state coordinating program here in Alabama. In 2009 and 10, a group of people came together and said, hey, what we really need is a Main Street state coordinating program here in Alabama, but we want to have a tad bit more control. So they're doing it within a 501c3 format. And they spent the next couple of years raising the funds for the program. And then in 2013, I was blessed to be selected as the state coordinator. I was the first staff person. I arrived in June of 2013. Since June of 2013, we came from basically 10 communities that we inherited that were still kind of loosely calling themselves Main Street communities, some of them more loosely than others. Some of them were really kind of still following the 4-point approach, other ones were in name only. So we inherited those 10 programs, and then in 2014, we started bringing on additional programs. So since then, we've grown from those 10 to 28 designated programs, and then there were no network communities ahead of that. So we've had tremendous growth. Go ahead, next. So some lessons to be learned. What happens when you don't advocate? Now, I was also, as Renee told you, worked in Kansas. I was a local Main Street director for 10 years. So it's always lovely to be able to talk from experience, to be able to relate those personal stories. That always helps in advocacy. But I also went from there to be the assistant state coordinator and the state coordinator in Kansas, which was located in state government. And the coordinator who was there before me was great. She was so much fun. Her name was Jean Stinson, if anybody remembers Jean Stinson that happens to be on here. And she had been running the state program for quite some time. And I had asked her when I came in, because I was very accustomed to advocating. It was something that we did all the time in Emporia. We raised, when I first started as the local Main Street director, we got $25,000 a year from them. Our budget when I first started was about $70,000. When I left, we were getting $75,000 a year from the city, and our budget was $300,000. And they still run that program today, and their budget's even higher. So the intent is to continue to advocate. So I asked her, I said, so when do we do our dog and pony show to the state? How do they know what Main Street's doing? And her reply was, you don't want to be a line item in a state budget because then it draws attention to you. She just had a very different way of looking at it. So Jean retires. It's, budgets are getting tight. It's when the real estate market was crashing all across the United States. And I had determined, because it was the way I was raised, if you work hard, keep your head down, work hard, and muscle through, that you'll be okay. But what I found out is water cooler politics, while personally to me are kind of distasteful, are still important. So it was very important that that advocacy happened, even though we were located within the Kansas Department of Commerce. So what happened there, I began to see the writing on the wall, budgets being cut, and ended up becoming a private consultant, but they cut the program. Got to the point where I was the only staff person. Does this sound familiar from the Alabama story? So it was really going to be tougher to keep the program going. So if you are located within a city program, or you're located within a statewide program, and you're within government, don't forget advocacy is still very, very important. So here in Alabama, we wanted to make sure that we kept our state and our federal legislators informed. So what you see off here to the side is we went to Washington, D.C. as a staff last fall, made advanced contact with all of our legislators, congressional people, made sure that we had taken this program highlight. We did it for obviously our senators, but we also did it for each of our representatives. And the ones we did for the representatives were just about their specific areas. So the pictures were different. They related to their communities. There's two or three other sheets that went along with this. It talks about the map of the entire state of Alabama, but also tied out just their district. And then we gave numbers that related just to their districts. So take the time, that time loaded up front, paid pretty big dividends for us. We had really great participation when we were there. We were able to get appointments with every one of our elected officials in DC. And of all of those, we spoke to all but 3 personally. And we spoke to staffers on the other 3. So I think we did pretty good for our first advocacy trip to DC. We do that at the state level as well. We also pull those numbers. We look at the representatives and senators and try to figure out, well, it's not hard. You can figure out where their region is that you're representing, and you make sure that you pull data from that area. You want to make it very personal to them. The other thing is we work with our directors on advocacy, because the best time to advocate is when they are in your community. So going to, we do a day on the Hill. A lot of people do those kinds of things. Like I said, we went to DC, but it was very important that you visit with legislators while they're in their towns, in their communities, wherever it is that they live. That's where you start getting a lot more influence and opportunities to share what you're doing. Make sure you involve your mayors and city clerks. I should have put that on there as well. City clerks, especially here in Alabama, you may have a city clerk in place a lot longer than you have a mayor in some cases. So make sure that you spend some time advocating and facilitating with them as well. Next. So the things that we're continuing to do is this year, as like a lot of you all, our budgets were looking good in the state of Alabama until COVID hit. Tourism is down 50% in Alabama, and that really affects a lot of what we do because we have very low property taxes here. So sales tax and tourism are a big piece of what we do. We had really worked hard on advocacy to raise our state appropriation. We actually do have a line item in the state of Alabama, line item budget just for Main Street, Alabama, and we had worked on increasing that from $150,000 to $300,000. And we were feeling pretty good about where things were going. We reached out to, you find out who the speakers are, you find out who's on the commerce committees, you find out all those things, and then you attach the appropriate local program to that person and make sure that that information is put out there. And of course, we did that as well. Then COVID hit, things got kind of nutty, but believe it or not, we still got an increase in our appropriation, even in COVID world. So we went from, we actually were at 141,000, and we're up to 175. So we didn't get quite what we were initially kicking for, but we're feeling like if there's the bounce back, who knows what tomorrow's going to bring, but we're feeling if the bounce back comes that we're hoping will come, we'll get our full ask in 2022. We also look at and having always an ex officio board member. We have a city clerk who's represented on there, as well as having someone from the congressional level, so a staffer. So we've had somebody from Representative Adderholt's office, and right now we have somebody from Senator Shelby's office who is on our board. And it's a great way to connect to the legislature. So they're on our board, they come to meetings, they're involved, they're invested, and report directly to you. So be thinking about having that connectivity on your boards as well. And then of course, we do an annual advocacy by our designated Main Street cities. So we work with the local Main Street directors to teach them how to advocate. We come up with a list of different things that will help our individual programs, economic development stuff from across the state, and make it very specific. So when you go in, you need to not just have information and say, here's our pretty brochure, and please, sir, may I have some more. You really need to have an ask in mind. So go in prepared for what, because they're going to ask you, what do you want? So you need to be prepared for that. When we went to DC, we basically said, we're not here to ask you for money. We're here to tell you what we do and what the National Main Street Center does. It's very important to us that you're informed and the impact that we're having on our state and your state. So that's how we handled that particular one. I don't remember if I have another one or not. Nope. Okay.
Well, thank you, Mary. I think that knowing that you have to get out and advocate in order for your program to not only survive but thrive is important. And also that the legislators understood the important work that you all are doing in terms of helping communities recover from COVID and
Yes.
the impact. So I think that having that knowledge of your all's program is one of the things that helped. So now we're going to be, oh, sorry, Janie, did you want to? Oh, sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
One of the things that I wanted to impress is that we need to ensure that there is always diversity in everything that we do. I'm just, I look at things that are going on, and we always want support from the entire community, but we don't bring them to the table. Our board, we are the African American Heritage Commission. Of course, we're represented by the governor's office, by all the universities, as ex officios, by all the universities in the state. And one of the things we stress is that even though it's an African American Heritage Commission, everybody does not have to be African American, because it needs to be diverse. Anytime that I see a picture, Renee knows that I speak my mind very, anytime that I see a picture and don't see an African American in it, I'm just turned off completely. So I happen to know that Alabama has a large African American population. My nephew is a writer for the Root magazine and lives in Birmingham, Alabama. And if I see a picture with everybody white, I'm saying, where the Black people? And that's going to be a big part of building coalitions in communities, and especially in this environment. You can no longer have these all-white boards, all-white committees,
Exactly.
because there are no longer all-white communities. So if I could say anything to the people who are listening to this, make sure that you are intentionally diverse. Because if you're not, you're going to have people like me saying, well, who do you represent? And you don't represent my community. My community doesn't look like that. So I'd like to make that point.
I think it's an excellent point. When we go into our Main Street communities, and also when I was a local Main Street director, we ask them to look and see, does your board represent your community, and does your board represent your district? So look at the district. I know when I was a director, we have in Emporia, we had a high Hispanic population, but no Hispanics were on our board at that point in time. So we really had to make the effort to say, okay, what are we doing? What do we need to do differently to make sure we have good representation? So that's an excellent point. We try to make sure we do that here as well.
So thank you for that, Janie, and thank you, Mary. Thank you both for your presentations and your thoughts. Kelly, do we have any questions from the audience that they would like to pose?
We absolutely do. And I want to start with a question for Janie. This is specific to funding for African American Heritage Commissions. What points can you share on how to get funding from state governments for African American Heritage Commissions? This comes from Kentucky, where their commission has been cut over the years and the AAHC has no resources to accomplish their mission.
Well, get you a grant writer. Again, as I said, the state appropriates $25,000 for the African American Heritage Commission. As executive director of the foundation, unpaid executive director, I am tasked with finding projects that for grant funding that will help us accomplish our mission. And I want to go back and say, yes, I'm unpaid as an executive director, but I get paid because we bring in all these grant opportunities, and there's always an administrator for the grant. So for instance, currently for this fiscal year beginning July 1, 2020, I have already secured over $150,000 in grant money, and I'm waiting on another response to another $100,000 that I've requested. So you can't live on grants. And that's why one of the things that we've done with funding from the National Trust for Historic Preservation is we've developed a plan to sustain us, and we will be launching in August our plan to develop funding resources that will sustain the foundation. And part of that 200 and some thousand, it's a little over 200,000 because I got $140,000 to get us through hiring an executive director, doing some training, and hiring that person so that that person can work on developing funding sources, not just grant writing, because you can't survive on grants all the time, although we've survived for the last 15 years. You can't just continue to survive on grants. You have to find a sustaining funding resource. But you have your local preservation. I mean, I don't know what your state does, but you also have the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which has been very good to us. And I get funding from the state, $25,000. I get funding from the Arts Commission. I get funding from the Humanities Council. I get funding from accommodations taxes in South Carolina. We have a project called the Green Book of South Carolina, which is a homage to the Green Book, where we have a web tour guide for 350 African American sites throughout the state. So what I've done is divided up the state and looked at communities and said, you have accommodations tax in your community, and accommodations tax, for those of you who might not be familiar, it's taxes on hotels in South Carolina. So I figure out what portion of the Green Book is in that city or that county, and I say, we're promoting this as tourism for you. This is the percentage of your taxes that we, accommodation tax grant that we need to get from you. And so you have to be real creative, because I know Maryland gets a lot of money for African American preservation. Some other states don't. We did lobby the General Assembly this year, 2 years ago, for a staff person for the African American Heritage Commission, and we did get the funding, and we do have a staff person at the Department of Archives and History now. So you really have to get creative in terms of raising funds.
Thank you, Janie, for that comprehensive response. Our responder has said that was quite helpful, or our questioner, so thank you. I want to throw out another question that is perhaps answerable by all, but Mary, you mentioned specifically, how do you get a legislative connection to serve on your board?
I asked. I mean, it really does come down to that sometimes, you know, reaching out and explaining. They are ex officio, so it does relieve them from voting on anything or having to raise money, do those kinds of things. But, and we also reached out to communities who had good relations with staffers. So it was as simple as asking, making sure they understood what our mission was. It hasn't been difficult to keep somebody on.
Well, one of the things that we do is we don't have a legislator. We have Congressman Clyburn's regional director on our board, because the staff are the people who make things happen anyway. Mm-hmm. And so he serves on our board. But also, the governor has an appointee to the commission, which helps. And and each state university has an ex officio member. We allow our ex officio members to vote. We give them voting power because it gives buy-in to them. So we've developed a very good relationship with universities. The other thing that we do is every year we do the Preserving Our Places in History Awards which is recognizing African American projects, not necessarily African American people, because it could be white people. We give a Legislator of the Year award every year. So we recognize them for their contributions, and we recognize them for their support, and they appreciate that.
Kelly, do we have any other questions?
We do. We have one more question, and I think it's very important to the conversation that we started here so that we can, round out Janie's advice previously. Would you offer any advice for approaching people to build diversity in their advocacy coalitions without making it look like, or without it being, simply filling a diversity need? What does that authentic kind of outreach look like?
It can't just be, I want a name on the board. It can't just be that. You have to select people who are going to contribute and allow them to contribute. If you, just don't go into the community and say, we need to have a Black person on our board, or a Native American, or, someone Hispanic. You have to bring people on who will have something to contribute, and allow them to contribute without feeling intimidated. That's the other thing. Because if you have a board of 30 white people, I'm telling you, I go to more meetings this in my lifetime, and still to this day, where I'm the only African American in the room. Of course, I'm not intimidated, but there are other people who might be intimidated with that setting. So you make it comfortable, number one, for them to be there. And number two, allow them to contribute. And don't make them the one and only person in the room if you can. I mean, I don't know of very few communities where if you have 10 people, African Americans or other people are only 10% of the population. So you're going to have that one person who's on your board.
Well, I think that was very well said. Thank you, Kelly, for those questions, and thank you, Mary, and thank you, Janie, for responding to them and for your time today. We have a couple of other things here about where people can continue the conversation. I think, as Kelly mentioned when we started the webinar, this is being co-produced by the Preservation Leadership Forum, and Forum Connect is the online community, which is free and open to everyone, where we can continue these discussions. And I know that Kelly is very much interested in folks joining in this conversation on the member community at mainstreet.org/thepoint. And also, these are the websites that you can visit to find out more information. As Kelly said, we're going to be posting these webinars up here so you can view them and share them with your friends and colleagues. And you can also see the past webinars and sign up for future trainings. So that is the contact information. And one last thing before you go, we wanted to note that we are collecting names for folks. We have an ongoing advocacy campaign to try and get congressional funding for Main Street programs. It is the first ever advocacy campaign for Main Street, and they have a sign-up sheet on their webpage where you can go and you can sign up to be alerted about when your help is needed. So I encourage you to do that. It's at www.mainstreet.org/speakupformainstreet. And they're trying to collect names of folks so that they can call upon people when that push is near. So thank you all for joining us, and we hope that you're able to join the rest of the series.